I make this argument knowing that, a bunch of the Islamic finance industry, actually the bulk of it, are probably time wasters.
Is it even credible for a country like the UK to really radically transform the way in which it functions from a financial perspective, given all of the linkages to everything else?
I think there can be a transition. And by the way, this conversation, I think, is a conversation that the Islamic finance scholars need to look at.
What kind of things are you investing in today?
How we think about where we are investing in.
Is this route to a new system even clear to you in terms of how it actually even possibly even comes about?
Yeah. So I want to definitely talk about this new system.
All right, Ibrahim Khan in the house. Well, you are the Islamic finance guru. So where's your turban?
I know. It was a late night, one night back in 2015, 2016 when we started Googling away available web domains. And I actually tried loads to do with Islamic finance investment, but they're all taken. And then we thought, all right, why don't we stick guru at the end of these things? And then Islamic Finance Guru, for some reason, was available. There we are.
There you go. So we're 10 years in now. So when's the rebrand coming?
Not anytime soon. I think, it's one of those things where ultimately, I guess the thrust of the question is, when do we want to talk about, when do we want to talk to non-Muslims as well?
Mm-hmm.
Or when do we want to talk to the world at large? I think for that, we've got Cur8 Capital, right? And that's actually really the core brand that we're working on at the moment. I think on the internet and when you're talking to people, it's really helpful to have focus on the exact audience that you're trying to address. So I actually don't think that we would ever lose Islamic Finance Guru. I think it does a great job for a Muslim audience. I think if we branched out to a wider audience, we would need to do that through additional content through basically the Cur8 channel. And actually the new YouTube channel that we've launched, the Ibrahim Khan channel, referred to internally as the IK channel, is basically that. So the thought there is that we want to talk to a much wider audience and just start that off and just kind of get that ticking away in the background and just see what happens.
So how do the two relate to each other? Like they are completely separate independent brands, or one is a subsidiary of the other? How does it work?
IFG and Cur8?
Mm-hmm.
So Cur8 Capital is the investment arm, and Islamic Finance, if I think of it from how the audience understands it, from what I've seen, they think of it as two separate things. Many people. People, once they're in the Cur8 ecosystem, they kind of understand the linkage. But most people understand IFG as this education platform that provides courses and provides, content and is, out there doing events, blah, blah, blah. And then some of those people will filter down and then they hear about this Cur8 thing, which is an investment platform. And that is a very different experience. Like the relationship that the investor has with Cur8 is one of a client and, working with us. Mm-hmm. And the relationship that the consumer has with IFG is more like, Martin Lewis and Money Saving Expert. So it's a lot more, I guess there's a lot more room between the audience and the website, if that makes sense.
So if IFG is the educational arm and Cur8 is the investment arm, then so you're saying, okay, fine, in terms of the education to the world, so to speak, that's going to happen now through your personal channel, but not through IFG. And IFG is just speaking to
Muslims
internally. Okay, fine. All right, but let's dig into it a bit more because obviously, conceptually, and I understand that that's how the way that things are and the way that things were, obviously, when you started. But the notion of Islamic finance is something which I'm still to be persuaded is even a notion. So I actually want to have that discussion a bit more properly, where we can try and convince each other, or you can convince me. I'll give you the opportunity to convince me that the terminology is either, sort of either accurate or necessary, or is it just that's just the way it was. So that's just the way it needs to be. What's the need for particularly labeling it in that way?
I mean, you're right that it's not necessarily that I labeled it in that way. It's just the Islamic finance industry, right? And that's just how we've received it. And I think let's kind of think about the pros and the cons of it. The obvious pros of it are that it's very clearly identifiable. Like what we're referring to is, clear in people's head that this is that group of companies that does that. And I think at this point the genie is probably so far out of the bottle that to try and rebrand it in some way is actually quite confusing for people. So anyway, that's I think the reason why it's the way it is. Now there could be an argument made that said, okay, does it need to be called Islamic finance? Why don't we just call it ethical finance or just finance? I think the challenge that you have with that is like, what are you using it for? Because finance could be used, in so many different contexts. Ethical finance, again, could be used in so many different contexts. So we would need to come up with a term that actually just cuts through the noise, and so people actually understand what it is that you're talking about. Like you could talk about faith-based finance. So that could be a line of attack that you could take. But there's actually differences between, the Catholics, they've got their own criteria, and I think the Mormons have got their own criteria, and then obviously you've got Muslims with their own criteria. So I don't know if there's an easy path through it. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Like what would you say is how should we be positioning this stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, this comes down to the like a discussion which I'm having with a lot of different individuals in different contexts. And you see, what it is that when we talk about Islam in the way that we do, and we use the Muslim and Islamic as adjectives, we are part and parcel of us doing that is us almost framing or using those terms in the context of an inherently accepted like secular norm. So the norm is some sort of undefined neutrality where there is no affiliation or belief or whatever. And then you have all of these, various groups that will describe themselves in different ways. Whereas for us, and I think what aligns more with the Quranic kind of thrust of things, is that there being a God and the human being's submission to God is norm, right, and central, and then things deviate from that in the way that they deviate from that. So when we refer to, like, for example, if there was to be, even in the finance industry or different industries, right, there are companies, let's say in the fashion industry, for example, right, that's a good example as well, because you have maybe something of a parallel where you have, once upon a time maybe there was Islamic fashion, then it was like, oh, that's a bit weird, so modest fashion, and then it's just like, okay, you can have fashion. So somebody could introduce a fashion brand which has certain ethics, certain parameters, certain rules, like they pride themselves on doing things in a particular way. They don't do certain things. And that almost just speaks for itself. They can describe that. They don't have to label the whole thing in any other particular way. They're bringing forward a product or service based on certain parameters and values, which they can make clear to anybody. You don't need to enter into this whole world of jargon to understand it. Then on the recipient end, and even for us now, bringing it back to finance, one of the issues is that, internally we see it as I'm sure you're aware, and you'll probably agree, you can tell me if you don't, but many of us go into this, or we approach this Islamic finance or Sharia compliant thing just really from a rules-based, almost fear-based kind of thing, right? I don't want to do the thing that's going to earn me, sort of cause me problems later, without really an understanding of what difference is it. What's the real substantial difference? And I know that you've tried to, you do, and you try to address that in terms of people's understanding. But the point being is that those benefits, if there are wider benefits to the particular way in which we are offering finance, or we're suggesting people organize themselves financially, those are universal benefits, right? They don't just apply to us. As soon as you label, so for me, the con, is that the biggest con. When I say con, I don't mean, since we're talking finance, we should clarify what we mean by con, the opposite of pro in this case. The biggest disadvantage is that as soon as you label it in that way, you will automatically just alienate, maybe put off, or just make a lot of people feel that this is not for me. It's not relevant for me. And to my mind, it just doesn't make any sense for us to say that there's any solution or product that we would put out there for Muslims to benefit from that shouldn't be as equally beneficial or relevant to anybody else. And so as soon as you put that label on it, then it's kind of almost becomes the form over the substance. And then, as you know, obviously with the whole, mortgages and all of this stuff, home finance and everything, all of the debate is around substance over form, which is fine. That's where the debate should be. And maybe we'll come on to it, maybe not. But the point being is that it's at that level that a person, so somebody who now wants to buy a house, anybody should be able to understand like why this is now a better way to buy a house, but not in a way that's just because it's ticked some like jargonistic kind of boxes, but in substantial real terms, like what is the actual, moral reason for this, which really gets lost. So that's it. If there is actually a distinct moral case for the products and solutions that we are putting out there, then why not just make that case for everybody in an equal fashion, and then it synergizes well with a broader agenda of just making this like the value of submission to God, and then as it manifests in all these different spaces, just a much more apparent.
Yeah. I think the challenge that we have to kind of navigate through is listening to the audience. So the audience are in a particular place, and when we do surveys of our audiences in terms of what are the key things that attracts them to us, and what are the key things that they have challenges with. A lot of the challenges are to do with administration, customer service, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. But then the key thing that attracts them to us is the halal aspect, the Sharia compliant aspect. That's for them really, really vital. And in my head, the way I see things evolving is that I think we are getting to that, we're just at the cusp of getting to that maturity where we start thinking a little bit more broader. But I think this stuff needs time. For us, and I'll explain how we do the transition as well. So we're at about 150 million AUM. That's really tiny.
But we're talking on the investment arm still.
Yeah.
But we don't need, I'm saying even before we leave that for a second, even in terms of the educational side.
Yeah.
Right. So actually just on that point that you made, right? So let's just stay there for a second, and we'll get to the, the actual, your 150 million and how that's going to become 1.5 billion and whatever else. But like, as you were speaking, reminded me of like, okay, they want to know that it's halal or Sharia compliant. Okay, fine. They also want to know that with food. Okay, but they're not
correct.
They don't need to, like, they just need to see a label on any restaurant.
Absolutely.
So that's the thing, right? But that's how it started as well, in a way. It didn't start out with, we have to have halal restaurant is literally the name of the thing, the halal food industry, whatever. Okay, there might be such a thing called the halal food industry. I mean, it's a separate thing. But the point being is, I can go to any restaurant and the symbol of halal, represents something. Now, the truth of the matter and what actually has gone on and what the standards are, that's a separate thing. And then obviously there's different accreditations depending on people's preferences and beliefs and whatever. But I don't see why, meaning, the first point you made, I don't think is the reason as to why it can't be, it can't sort of go the way I'm suggesting, because I can come up to this product and you're fine. You put that kite mark or whatever you're doing and it's compliant.
I think that's the logical point of maturity. That's where we get to. But even with the halal industry, if you think about it, it started off with the halal food store, right? When you kind of first arrive, that's really important for people. That's the thing, right? And then the whole thing matures, and then London becomes like most of the places in London are now halal anyway. And then it becomes a lot more it just needs to have this tick, and then we're happy with it. I think the Islamic finance industry or the halal investment industry is a little bit earlier in that journey. And how I see that transition happen is, right, let's see how this IK channel starts performing. That's kind of our first kind of flag planting in a certain direction. Or the Twitter, for example, our Twitter X is more geared towards the mainstream. And let's just see how the audience feedback is. And I think what we will find over time is actually, to be honest, IFG is very much for Muslims. Cur8 is more subtly for Muslims. It's like it says Sharia compliance somewhere in there, but it's not, bang on in your face. And I suspect that as we get more traction from this direction, that will evolve. And so then we get to this kind of happy medium, right? Where you need to have at least some symbology or some kind of signaling that, yeah, this is for the ones who want the, the halal, kite mark. But at the same time, you open it up broad enough for everyone. Yeah. So I think for us, it's like, ideologically, I agree with you. I get the thrust of it. And ultimately, the reason why I care about this is because I think about investments as transformational for basically the economic fabric of society. And I know that, that's just going to come with time, like it comes with scale. So there's no point necessarily rushing it and, losing the base. So for us, we're just about, let's say break even. In the next 2-3 years, we should be at, a pretty good position, God willing. And see, I didn't say inshallah, God willing. And it's working well. You go from 150 to about 10 to about 100 billion. That gets you in the kind of top 10 of the UK asset managers. And then globally, you need to get into a trillion plus to get into the top 10 there. So it's what I'm saying is it happens all in kind of the right time, and it happens at the right stage. You go too early and you actually lose, the core, the base, and you go too late and it's too late.
Yeah,
right?
I'm still not really convinced about this. You'll lose the base because I remember back in the day when I used to have interactions with various. I suppose I can be fairly clear about it. Like when I used to talk to the senior team at Islamic Bank of Britain, and then obviously became Al Rayan Bank, by their own surveys, they consistently did surveys that showed that most Muslims didn't care too much about Islamic finance as far as their home purchasing or whatever else is concerned. The majority didn't, right? So we're talking about, in the country terms anyway, we're talking about 4 or 5% of the country, and then take out the kids and take out everybody else, right? So it's like, and then of the adults who are even in a position to make this decision, then more than half of them. So we're talking about a very small percentage in the grand scheme of things. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you think that's changing? Do you think, like, if you
massively changing?
Okay, so you think where do you think we are right now in terms of percentage of adult, Muslims who want to who are looking for Islamic finance solutions, just in terms of everything that they're doing?
So there's two things. One is like just demographics. The other one is religiosity and awareness of this stuff. So demographics, I think 7.5% of the population is Muslim, and that's increasing over time. Half of them are under 25, but that means that they're all going to grow into basically the target audience for us. And I think just that sheer demographic shift is really strong. And I think Muslims, most Muslims are HFA Muslims, should we put it that way, right? Most Muslims don't really care, if I'm honest, about HMC, but they do care about halal, right? And they would prefer halal, and I think the majority, even if you might have maybe 20% or so, will be happy to go for a cheeky, like, I don't know, Tesco chicken sandwich or something. They would generally stick to halal if they can get it, if it's easy. And I think on the investment side, it's quite similar. So then you've got the whole, and this is kind of now segueing into the core religiosity argument. I think what's been happening in Israel-Palestine, and generally I think what we've been seeing with the rise of the far right has actually got Muslims thinking a lot more about what their finances are doing for the first time in a way that's I think unprecedented from what I've seen, and I think that's driving a lot more awareness even for not so practicing Muslims, right? The guys that might be heavily in the Palestine movement, they would actually be thinking, hang on a second, I now need to think about Sharia or ethical funds, and I think that's an interesting shift that's very much live. And I think the cat's out of the bag on that one as well. And exactly how the the cookie crumbles there is unclear to me, because where the big bulk of investments actually lies in public markets, and you probably saw, some of the Islamic public equity managers have been getting some recent flack because they're kind of tied in to backing companies that are potentially problematic. So I think there's
And just on that, though, I was going to ask that as to whether what is labelled as Sharia compliant out there is is kind of has needed to adjust, and it sounds like yes, it has needed to adjust, meaning needed to kind of question, well, what do we have in our portfolio? It reminds me of like that time when in the church investment fund had like Wonga in it or something. I don't know if do you remember that? Yeah, so that was funny. But yeah, okay. So is that because reasonably things came to light subsequently in this recent crisis? Where realizations, which weren't apparent beforehand, that how various companies or investments are linked to various things, or is it the fact that that was always the case, but actually just people just weren't alert to it?
I think a bit of both, right? I'm sure Google was up to dodgy stuff, or Amazon, or Microsoft, or whatever. Maybe Amazon. I've thrown Amazon under the bus. Maybe Microsoft and Google are the ones that typically get mentioned in this. Actually, Amazon because of AWS, because of the data centers and what have you. I'm sure there were all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening in these data centers from a decade ago, but I think that has accelerated massively with the key unethical thing, the very visual unethical thing of warfare, and how data and AI and drones and all of that stuff has entered that for the first time. I think that's made it a lot more proximate. People have started putting two and two together, and it's become actually a very important part of that warfare. And at the same time, you've got Israel-Palestine, which is a very visible and emotional subject for many people. And so they've seen that connection, and there's an emotional kind of tag associated with that connection as well. And I think that's what's driving this change. So it's I actually think things have changed, right? Microsoft has become, more evil, right? If I kind of put it in a glib way, as time has gone, because the data centers that they provide have become more useful for the warfare. So I think it's both of those things.
Okay. Of all, taking this into account and taking into the consideration, say, other, the matters which already were maybe more core or fundamental to, let's call it Sharia compliant investments. Like, what proportion of all equity investments out there, public markets, roughly speaking, are fine, are okay?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
But what do you think? Gut feel?
Gut feel would be probably about somewhere between 35 to 50, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, so it's possible that half or more of what's available out there for people to invest in just publicly, just by virtue of either level of like the leverage that it might be under, or the nature of the industry, or how it indirectly connects to some either to this issue or some other issue, whatever. Okay, fine. So again, just tying back the conversation, bringing together everything that we've discussed so far, to summarize, if you were now to put forward in succinct terms to the country at large, right? What is the distinct moral case, or the basis upon which, what do you want people to consider before making an investment that speaks to them in their language, but also emerges from the values and the principles that you see that are rooted in what you call Islamic finance
or Islam, right? I'd say, I mean, the simple pitch to people is that our investments should they create a world around us that we either like or dislike, and so we should be channeling our money in those directions that are really trying to help locally as much as we can, because that is the moral obligation that we have to our community, to our family, to our country, or this area. And we're not doing that very much. And this is actually the same thing Rachel Reeves is saying, because they've realized that all the money is just going to the USA. And so we need to actually spend it locally, right? So I think that's very much a key argument to make. I think the second key argument to make is that, progress for us as a humanity and civilization happens by investing in businesses and entrepreneurship and risk taking. And we need to make sure that we're putting enough money into this at-risk capital, because we all care about, the progress of, our societies and civilization and what have you. And I think the third underlying thread to all of this is, and this links to wider economic structures, is justice and equality. I think we should be, like it or not, where we park our money puts power in the hands of certain people and takes it away from other people. And if that power concentrates too much and that power is going to people who are unethical, that again opens the doors for a world that we don't really like. So, we should be local. We should be trying to be as ethical and just as we possibly can be, and we should be, innovative with what we're doing. So that's surface level. Then I think it gets deeper. So this is really at the level of investment, menu. What are you doing? And then after that, I think it gets back to the way that the monetary system works, because when you're small, like we are, and like most asset managers are, you kind of have to work within the menu that is available to you, within the ingredients that are available to you. But I think Islam will have a critique on, let's actually have a look at the ingredients themselves. Let's have a look at the banking system, or the rails, or the money. What is money? Let's have a look at all of those things. And so we're naturally going to be constrained, I think, by the ingredients that we have as to what products we can create. But we won't be able to have a direct, influence on the ingredients until we are so large that, we can actually have that conversation with those who provide the ingredients, that guys, we actually need to, let's think of a new way of, why don't you create a new ingredient for us, and let's work with that. And then what you want to do is you're trying to, blow into life this new, kindling into like a fire over here. And then hopefully this world actually looks a lot better than the existing world, because this is hopefully, more just, more innovative, more local than this ever was, or could be. And then this subsumes the other, and then that's how you have creeping Sharia.
Right. Okay. In that explanation, where does somebody situate the issue of riba or interest, and how do they now, as things are today, understand it or relate to it as a moral problem? And how would you just explain to the general public like what the issue is, and also practically, therefore, what they should do?
A lot of Islamic finance, as you kind of alluded to earlier, has certain rules in place around, these are the criteria the maximum amount that we're going to allow for lending, etc., etc. And this is kind of what I mean by, we are limited by the ingredients that we have, because really, if I could wave a magic wand, I wouldn't really want to be investing in anything that was taking money from the banks, because I see that as a compromised position. Even if you accept conventional interest is impermissible, right? So if you accept that, then this is a compromised position anyway. But I actually think it's even more fundamental than that, where you ultimately want to have that conversation with what is this monetary system, and how can we make that more just? And so in order for us to even have, so what I'm saying is that the investments that we've got right now, we are working within the parameters of let's say the AAOIFE standards, or we're working within the parameters of what exists, and what is possible. But as we get larger, we need to have that we need to have that attack on those things. So like where does riba fit into all of this? It's it would be around how much on the public side, how much debt you can take on, and then on the private side, you would be looking to work with Islamic banks if you are going to take on any financing, and the structures of investment that you use should be investment structures that Islam and the Sharia scholars have approved of, rather than your conventional lending structures.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get to is, how would you explain to the general public what the problem with the conventional lending structures even is?
So this is where I think so I'll give you the glib answer that we would give to people.
And then give me the proper one.
Yeah, and then we'll get into the proper one.
Yeah.
And it's actually not even just, it's not non-Muslims, it's Muslims as well, who, the same answer would be given to them, but if you dig into it, you need to give the proper answer.
Okay.
So the glib answer is that, these structures ultimately, have a lot more, risk sharing, or at least in principle, they should have a lot more, risk sharing associated with it. There's
which if I borrow from an Islamic bank,
for example, yeah.
Okay.
And they wouldn't necessarily be as exploitative in certain circumstances. On the investment, when you're making, I know in your head you might be thinking about home finance right now, but I'm not actually.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about business finance, for example.
Okay, cool.
So I'm just thinking about like or it could be home finance,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm trying to kind of get to the essence of, as things stand, if we wanted to make the case to the general public as to why they should not be financing their affairs in such and such a way, which presumably we believe that they shouldn't be doing, right? Just as we believe that we shouldn't be doing. If that's what we believe, then I'm trying to see, how do we actually explain
What's the case? Yeah. So it's this risk sharing aspect, right?
Okay.
And that's basically the glib answer. So it's fairer, a bit more risk sharing, and we don't invest in really immoral stuff, right? So that's kind of the glib answer.
But if I'm a borrower,
Yeah.
if I'm borrowing to start a business, I'm John, I want to start this business. The business itself, there's no ethical issues or what have you, and now I want to borrow to get started.
Yeah.
Like, do you think right now we can make a clear case to John as to why he should borrow? I mean, I don't even know what is an Islamic bank he could even borrow from today for a business.
Not for business.
There isn't. Okay, fine.
That's part of the problem with Islamic banks at the moment.
Okay, fair enough.
Not enough
So then,
business
is the advice for business borrowing, even
Yeah.
for anybody in our community who wants to start a business, what's the official position then? Given the situation, just borrow wherever, basically.
That's not my position.
No. What are they supposed to do?
So I think we're trying to create funds that they can actually provide financing in a halal way,
Yeah.
as much as possible.
But when you say it's not your position, you see, this is the thing. So where I have a problem is where the advice that we give internally cannot credibly given to anybody. That I think is a major issue. Like, I think because if we bring it down to the principle of whatever is correct or true or right or compliant or within the bounds of what we think could be acceptable to God given the circumstances, I don't see how that can be now different just because you call John or Bilal, basically.
Right.
Meaning from an advisory perspective, yeah, somebody might have an extra reason as to why they might be more cautious.
Yeah.
But if you take away that kind of technical and the fear thing away from it, and you're just
Sure.
looking at it from the point of view of the right thing to do, or the intersection between the right thing to do and the sort of available options,
stuff, exactly,
right?
yeah.
Then why wouldn't is the thing to say to John and Bilal is equivalently that this is the situation, ideally X, Y, Z, but yes, given the circumstances, we'd go for it, but we advise you to maybe take X, Y, Z, ABC precautions, for example. But then you wouldn't be given different, because that is another key reason, I think, as to why we're not necessarily opening out. It's convenient to speak to, I don't want to put it this way, but it's almost as if, from the industry's perspective, we've got this relatively gullible set of people. We can just say whatever we want to say over here, but it's not credible advice to the public in general. But to me, that's a major compromise.
Yeah. There's a bunch of things here, right? So let's go back to where we would like this, world to get to. I actually think that banks and the lending system, as it stands right now, banks in particular, have a massive advantage just because of the way the monetary system is set up. And because of that, even conventional mainstream banks, they don't do very much business finance, right? They actually, this entire economy is focused around home finance. And why is that? Because it's easy to take, you know, collateral with a house and then off you go.
Yeah.
And I actually think if you change the monetary system the way it is, and you reduce the advantage that banks have, where they're effectively able to pop money into existence, that will naturally mean that you know, the financial sector will still be intermediaries between those who have money and those who don't, but they will now become investment companies, right? Rather than banks and insurance companies, they'll just become investment companies. And so what that means is investment companies take in money and they give out money, and the best investment company is the one that makes the most money for their investors and manages the risk most effectively, right? And so when banks, you know, that have their advantage taken away, they evolve into this, and naturally, because they can't just have this kind of risk-free, you know, spread where they can borrow off the Bank of England and give it out at a higher interest rate. They don't have that anymore. They then have to actually start pumping naturally into growth, and that's where you actually see, you know, hopefully, you know, the society, humanity, etc., accelerate. So that's the end vision. And actually, the root cause problem there is the way that the financial system is set up. Now, you know, translating that back to John and Bilal in a glib way is actually quite difficult. And I think what you would say to like someone like John is that so let's leave the Islamic side aside for a second. You know, you need to, you know, take on financing. You need to grow. You know, try and use perhaps some of the more, you know, ethical banks if you can, or try, if you can, avoid the banks entirely and try and take on equity, because, you know, we think that that's actually a better way.
But that's what you'd be saying to both of them.
I don't think I would. This is where the, you know, the Muslim in me comes out. Or the, you know, I wouldn't want to say to Bilal to go to a traditional bank and take out a loan.
I understand. I do understand why you're saying that, but this is where I think the credibility of the thing kind of breaks down slightly, and also this is where I feel that we don't sufficiently put ourselves in the position. Like, it's not a credible position if it's not a universally applicable kind of offering given the circumstances. So it's not that you're changing your principles. It's not that you're changing your ideals. It's not even that you're changing where you want to get to. But as we know, even in Revelation, this thing happened over time. And one thing I have long not understood really is why the advisors and the scholars within this realm aren't, you know, rather than it reminded me of like, it reminds me of, you know, parts of, say, banking, or you know, where basically they just sort of draw a box, you know, and with it, and almost play a separate game over here with the separate rules, right? And we're doing this over here, and with no real consideration of whatever else. And obviously, when that goes badly, it can go quite badly. But here it's almost like, whatever is being said to us living in the same circumstance, from a moral standpoint, ethical standpoint, you know, Quranic standpoint, like, to me, I just don't see any reason as to why the advice, like, that's a great test, a litmus test, I think, for the kind of advice that's being given internally, that it should be can be credibly given, you know, generally speaking, given the circumstance. Another way to look at that would be to say, okay, like, let's say that you were, it's all very well saying, okay, no riba, all of this stuff, but if you were in charge of, like, if you were in Downing Street, right, and you were the Chancellor, then what?
What would you do?
Yeah. And so, yes, and maybe we'll then get into, because then I want to get into and give you the opportunity to speak about, okay, what does this systemic change look like, right? Because one way, as you said, is to, you become big enough so that the industry or the system cannot ignore what you have to say. And obviously that's an important part of it. Another part of it, to a degree, I don't know. And I don't know where the balance is. I don't know where the politics, to the extent to which the political power or leverage actually has an influence in this or not. You can you know, sort of tell me what that is. But it's like the kind of policies that you would, what's the economic policy that you would, you know, you wouldn't be standing there as a chancellor credibly, right, as a believer, and saying, you know, well, you know, nobody borrow, nobody do anything. Like, it just won't make any sense. It's not a workable policy. And to the extent it's not even minimally workable for the population at large, I don't see, again, why we restrict ourselves in that way.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I've had conversations before with, I think you're talking to the wrong guy. So
I'm not talking to the wrong. I'm going to talk to every guy, but
and girl.
and girl,
Yeah.
yes.
I think.
No, you've had a conversation. So who should I be talking to?
Yeah, so I've had conversations with the traditional Islamic finance scholars, where I think it's their remit, because they set they give out the fatwa
Yeah, I know, but
that
you're.
people follow.
I know.
So maybe, and you can critique and you say, actually, you can shoot from the hip and say your thing as well. But assuming that we want to kind of adhere with the hierarchies of how things have been set up, what I've said to some scholars is that I actually think that we need to be a lot more MVP with fatwa, and we need to be really agile as to the emerging situation, right? Where, for example, decarbonization and the climate crisis. I don't know if you believe in this stuff or not, but let's say we do, right? Climate change is happening. We need to do stuff about it. A lot of the stuff that needs to happen, it requires huge amounts of money, and it needs to happen now to change that. And the reality is there's not enough Islamic finance available at all to facilitate that. So my personal view is that the necessity argument just means that you should be allowed to take conventional finance. Now the challenge is I don't necessarily have iftar, right, kind of levels of authority, but I think that argument makes sense.
It does make sense, and I would say to you, obviously, and whether you're doing it out of humility or convenience, I don't know. But the point is that the reality is across the board, and many scholars will mention this as well, which is that practitioners are the ones who lead the way. Frankly, meaning because they bring the real world. Right. True scholarship completely absorbs, or integrates the reality of the situation, and sees and makes the ruling now not just based on a kind of a limited individual view of sort of point in time compliance, but is looking at an overarching policy that links up to a multi-year thing. And that's what I see is a failure of scholarship across the board. Meaning very little is being done, or there's in most cases there's no vision, meaning that systemic change, most of them couldn't describe what the systemic change even looks like credibly, or how to get there. So then why are you the person to give me the opinion now about what to do when you're not, when actually what we're interested in is bringing about this overarching kind of change. But yeah, okay, so what does that look like then? Because okay, we need to question banking system, what is money, all of this stuff. A lot of this discussion has been happening, obviously on the crypto side with Bitcoin as well. A lot of people swear by that as this is the new thing, and that's what we need to bring in. That seems to, it still seems to be, from what I can tell, as the quick buck investment sort of thing, as opposed to in most people's minds the new money that we can all going to get into, and upon which a new system is built. Is this route to a new system even clear to you in terms of how it actually possibly even comes about?
Yeah. So let's. I want to definitely talk about this new system. But just finishing off on this, so you've got this kind of, I guess, curve, right? Where on one end you've got clear necessity argument. You should be allowed to take out, conventional finance. And people like Sheikh Qardawi very famously, gave his fatwa back in the day around this as well. And then I think you've got this curve where, on venture capital, early stage tech startup doesn't need to take out any bank debt. It just gets, venture capital, and that's usually fine out of the box. And then you've got all this stuff in the middle. And I actually think for the vast majority of people in this middle, they could go for the conventional, or they could go for the Islamic. I think the Islamic is harder to do, but it can be done. And I think some of these things, there may not be very much difference. There may be it might be structuring difference between the Islamic and the conventional, but I still think they should do the Islamic. And I think they should do the Islamic because this is us, kindling that fire that then allows us to go for the systematic system change.
No, no, I do understand that point. Just one thing that occurred to me within this, because I heard it mentioned recently. Is it the case in your view that most of those people who are running the organizer or the companies or the places where this Islamic finance is being provided, that they themselves are even Muslim believers?
Yeah,
like are they actually? Because if they're doing it just as a way, just as a kind of in a transactional way, just to take advantage of, again, this gullible lot of people over here who wants a particular type of thing, and as long as we put this term on it, then it's all fine and tick certain boxes. Because how's that going to help, really? If it's not going to be, if it's not part, because you want everybody, whether it's the person trying to start that business, buying their home, investing, borrowing, and you want everybody to be, and then the providers, the service providers, to be aligned with this broader kind of picture, right, that we're trying to move into. But if they're not really, what difference is it going to make?
100%. So this was the next point I was going to make, which is that I make this argument knowing that a bunch of the Islamic finance industry, actually the bulk of it, are probably time wasters in the sense that they're not on script with what I'm saying here, because they're kind of they're either doing it because at a kind of superficial level because they're Muslims and they kind of want to work in Islamic finance, and this gives them that comfort because they're not working conventional anymore, or they might not be Muslims at all and they might be doing it because there's a commercial opportunity, or, and actually this is an important thread here, there might be sovereigns, right, Muslim sovereigns that are doing this stuff because it's important for the power structures in their country, and so you've got all of these dynamics at play, and how I think about it as IFG Cur8 Capital is that the reality is I can't change all of that right now, but what I can do is have conversations like this. We've written long form white papers on what our vision for the future is. Try and educate people, corral people in the industry itself, so that this message kind of starts permeating through the industry. And over time, we see that change. And then the reality is what's going to happen is there's, a few of these hopefully smaller fintechs or, investment firms that grow larger. And the natural implication of that is maybe at some point there's some partnership or takeover, consolidation between all of these things. And then this, ideology, which is working, right? And that's why people come to it, that then percolates through the system. But it is actually important, I think, to still support those, even though I struggle with them, and I feel like sometimes they're a bit of a waste of time ideologically, the Islamic banks. I still think we should support them because their time will come. They are an important piece in the puzzle on this journey to change, and that piece of the puzzle is the sovereign piece, right? Where in order to bring about change at the system level, you basically need to have the ear of a sovereign. And it might be that the UK government, maybe at some point, does it, but I think it's actually much more likely to come from a sovereign or in an already Muslim majority country, right? Because that's where their power lies. And so that's why I think we should still support these Islamic banks, and we should obviously try and influence within. And I think that's happening very slowly but surely. But we should still support them for that, that time to come.
Fine. So systemic change happens how?
Yeah. So if I was in which country?
No,
globally.
Let's just stay here for a second.
You're such a Brit.
I am. Unfortunately, I am. It's yeah. What does it look like? What does that pathway look like? Let's just say there's a political will, right, for something different at a really fundamental level.
Yeah, brilliant.
First of all, is it even credible for a country like the UK to really radically transform the way in which it functions from a financial perspective, given all of the linkages to everything else? I mean, is that even credible, firstly?
Yeah.
Or does it require a much, how far can it go? Or does it need a kind of a multi, like a multilateral kind of approach simultaneously almost?
Yeah.
And what change are we even talking about here anyway?
I think there can be a transition. And by the way, this conversation, I think, is a conversation that the Islamic finance scholars need to look at.
Yeah.
Because I think the reason why they're reluctant...
they're the ones that should be having having it. Yeah.
You should have that, right? So the reason why they're, I think, reluctant about, saying, oh, you're allowed to take conventional is because of the precise point you made, which is they don't have an end vision. But if you are on a journey and you can actually see the journey,
Then of
rather
course.
than a rule-based thing,
Yeah.
then you would allow it,
Yeah.
because you've got clear parameters and criteria around that,
Exactly.
and then you kind of go on that journey.
And just on that, just very briefly, just one thing, which I think again is it's a very simple point where you look back at the prophetic example and the evolution of even the way verses are revealed over a period of time, and gradualism is what we call a sunnah of Allah Himself, right? Like God Himself, His way is to His way of facilitating societal transformation, right, is through a gradual evolution, like you said. And so there were so many things which were permissible at the beginning. Like for us to just imagine that for a second, right, that there were so many things which become impermissible over time or problematic over time, whatever, that are not there at emphasized points at the beginning. And actually, I don't think it's a coincidental that, a lot of the key riba verses were right towards the end. Because until you have, like you exactly as you've said, until you've got the political and the other things in order and people have got their basics in place, it's almost the hardest thing to change, right? Which is where we find ourselves now. So yes, okay. So what's the pathway then?
I keep on thinking of other things before we get to the pathway. I will go. So let me say this one final thing, and that is, it's a great point that you're making about how we think about the seerah, and I think this is why we should, because we're taking community along with us on this journey. It's no good just having ideas. We need to actually bring them along, and I think that this stuff, frankly, might be too complicated for people to even. It might not be too complicated for them to understand, but they're just too busy to worry about this stuff too much in this level of detail for all of the different bits of Islam.
They don't need to know the detail, but I don't think too busy people are for all the points you made earlier yourself about this high level of consciousness now, or awareness, or thinking about the world and realizing the impact of things. I don't think people are too busy to appreciate or to be, let's say, sold on what a better future looks like. Right. And then in simple terms, because it needs to be made simple for people like me, right? It's okay, now what do you now here's what you do and don't do if you want to participate in that better future.
So what I'm saying is that you've got these kind of conventional scaffolding of Islam today, and a lot of it, I think, is driven by the Cur8 kind of training system and the hierarchies that have been created around that, and I think it would be what we need to do is, rather than tear the building down and build it up afresh, because if we do that, people will die in the rubble. We need to slowly put up scaffolding and support around this edifice, and then it's much more painful, but then rebuild that structure. And then once it's done, then you pull down the scaffolding, and actually that's kind of decently standing, and then maybe you put in a complete new extension in there as well. So coming back to what would I do if I was Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer? I would look at the society, and economics is inextricably linked with politics and community and world at large, right? And you're seeing mass inequality rising, and I think that if this kind of continues on, we're going to see some major wars, right, or some kind of cold war that's going to emerge, just because of what's the direction of travel that we have between those who have and those who don't. So you've got this kind of tension, and at the same time, you're massively struggling because you don't have the money to do anything. So, and I'm not an economist, so I should caveat this. So I actually, encouraged in the white paper that we did, economists should be coming in and adding or critiquing and destroying my thoughts and kind of giving an alternative. Sure. But my thought is, so things like positivemoney.org have done some early thinking on this, where you slowly but surely create a national kind of sovereign fund or something along those lines, where the power of some money creation happens, the majority of it happens within traditional banks these days. And it's saying we're basically going to increase your liquidity requirement. So from 15% or whatever it is according to Basel, we're going to increase it higher and higher, and at the same time we're going to take that liquidity that we've stopped from being issued, and we're going to issue it directly through a national infrastructure program, and suddenly you've got money, right? And this is gradual, so it doesn't necessarily cause a massive shock to the entire system. You're not stopped, riba and like lending and blah blah blah. You just let that be as it is, and you don't even for the time being, it's not ideological. You want to keep your political base. Lending is fine, right? And the National Infrastructure Bank might be using lending structures even, right? Ideally, if I'm in charge, I would try and make them a little bit more like, ethical and a bit more rent, lease based, etc. So you've got that going on. And then you just, ramp that up over time. And naturally what starts happening as the collateral of the banks, as the liquidity that reserves of the banks need to keep rises, banking becomes less appealing as a prospect, and they start doing probably two things. One is thinking about, oh, hang on a second, let's actually get into investments, and then the second is, oh, hang on a second, let's start potentially paying, let's start potentially charging people for the payment rails, because right now they're providing these payment rails for free. Then they do that because we're giving them all this money, and they can use that to make more money. But if that isn't as isn't the case as much, then they're going to need to charge for this, which I think is good, because then it's clear that okay, there's payments, and I think there'll be banks that emerge where you pay them 5-10 quid a month, and they say we're not going to do anything with your money. It's literally just going to sit there. We're not going to do anything else with it, and so unless you ask us to, and so then you've got clear provision for payments that's paid for, clear provision for investment that's paid for, and the most successful of those will be those who do well, and those who don't won't be successful. And slowly but surely, the lending sector probably will remain for several decades, if not hundreds of years, because there will always be a place for lending, your classic lending, but it will taper down dramatically, and the guys who actually then will have the power and the influence, and where the growth will be happening is this investment sector, because they own things more than the banks do, over time, or this National Infrastructure Bank will own things more than the banks do over time. So that's where the power will lie, and so the people who will own things will be either the people themselves via the government or investment firms, and I think investment firms, they are responsible in a much more proximate way to their clients, which are the people themselves, rather than banks, because banks are not actually, HSBC doesn't answer to us with what it does with our money. We just kind of bank with HSBC. But an investment firm, you have a lot more, control over it. Not like complete control, but a lot more control. And I think that then creates a world where, the places where we are parking the money, they become the right kind of places over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about that's all? Still, all assumes a fiat system.
Yeah.
Is it fiat forever then?
I'm not like I've not made my mind up. I'm agnostic as to the exact monetary system that we use.
But can you have? I mean, isn't one of the arguments to do with you can only have a riba-free system if we don't have it, if it's not a fiat system? Is that true in your mind, or it's not necessarily the case? You can have what you call a Sharia compliant society system economy and still have fiat money.
Honestly, I don't. This is probably above my pay grade. I don't know enough or have thought enough about this to kind of figure it out. It could be that this is like, because I'm very much about this gradualism, right? And I think overnight change.
No, I understand. But I'm just saying, just in principle, maybe. Because obviously, those who swear by
crypto.
Exactly, and a Bitcoin based sort of system, let's say, will argue for, for example, the supply is is limited. It's
Yeah.
all of these kinds of arguments that make it more akin to, say, gold or something,
Yeah.
right, rather than a fiat based system. And so, to your mind, like, okay, fine. Yeah, like, I was just trying to understand whether you agree with the fact that on a more fundamental theoretical kind of basis, whether you can actually build a system that is morally and legally sort of appropriate or that works on a fiat foundation.
So, I mean, we were talking about like superstructures and like really complicated
No,
stuff.
that's like, I know that's the end.
Yeah.
I know that's the nth kind of degree, but
So-
in a way, with regards to this point, painting a picture of the vision and thinking about pathways and stuff, it's obviously a very important thing to at least have a
sketch
view on.
Yeah.
Because then things obviously.
So the lending side, right, this money creation bit, where you create debt in the system, that is now all being done by. So rather than the money issuance happening through debt creation, that's basically happening with the government printing money and providing it into the system through the infrastructure. So you kind of reduce the I guess the harmful effects of fiat by doing that. And it might be that you can set up other like projects, right? Like a I don't know, a sovereign stable coin or something, and you start exploring along those lines as well. But to my mind, currency is a function of there's two things that influence currency. One is the approbation and acceptance of society for that currency, and the second is power, in particular military power, because all these crypto bros, no matter how much you talk about it, until you actually capture the government or the military, then it kind of doesn't really matter. They will still seize your assets, or they don't really care. They will literally torture you to get your Bitcoin, whatever it is, the passwords that you have for the Bitcoin, and then off you go. And ironically, I think they possibly have kind of done that now with Trump in power. They've kind of the crypto bros are actually in power, and you see that Bitcoin is kind of growing as a result of it. So ironically, it's kind of gone full circle where we were talking libertarianism and kind of small government, and we're going to be kind of rights oriented. But in order to deliver on that dream in the world, they've had to just go back to the traditional system. So to my mind, I'm kind of agnostic to it. And I think like the first bit of those of what I said, which is what does society accept? I actually think that's really what's going to matter. Now with cryptocurrency, in a world where we have AI and artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, quantum computing coming, will that withstand the test of time? Do we want a truly digital currency in that realm, or do we want to switch much more to hard assets that are a lot harder to hack? Like you can't hack a building, you can't really hack gold. I don't know. I've my kind of tendencies in this direction, and it could be that you try and create interesting ways to securitize this infrastructure, of the country that you've created, and that becomes some kind of underpinning to some kind of currency that is issued. That could be an interesting idea. I feel like that's much more the direction of travel, at least that I have. But as I say, I'm not an expert in this.
No, I understand. Is that you mentioned like Positive Money, which is a kind of quasi sort of think tank, right, for this kind of stuff. To my knowledge, we don't really have something that you might call a kind of think tank that is looking at all of these issues, that triangulating between vision, the actual system as it is right now, and understanding of our internal kind of principles. So can we set that up?
Yeah, a big need for it, I think.
Oh, well, set it up then.
Let's do it.
What does it take? I mean, presumably the minds are there, to kind of, and the concern is there, or not? Do we have the actual human capital that we need?
I think it needs better money. I
No,
think
we're fine.
it need probably the funding of. I don't know if we actually have the human capital even.
Really?
I think we
That's
would
a bit depressing.
yeah, I think we'd have to fund a bunch of PhDs, probably 3, 4, 5 PhDs, get those guys up and running so they're thinking about this subject. Maybe triangulate with some of the existing literature out there, and some of the guys that positive money type of guys. I guess there would be some plenty of actually available literature in the mainstream economics world that would
Yeah.
with some adaptation be relevant for this conversation. But yeah, I think we would need to do it a little bit first principles.
Or maybe just to bring the different people in, right? Like, okay, fine, you have your the people who are more on the sort of religious scholarly end, but who are willing to engage in this kind of and have a sufficient sort of aptitude and awareness to be able to engage in a much broader and future-looking conversation. But with those who are then, other people who are then, as you said, like existing academics and critics of the existing system and what have you. I mean, there must be a way to bring these together, because I feel that for any of these things to really move in the right direction, that the undercurrent of proper thought, has got to go hand in hand, essentially.
100%, yeah.
And by your own admission, to a degree, whoever you're going back to receive your parameters from, that they're not seeing a lot of this. Like a lot of them, not necessarily all of them.
I think some of them are.
No, fine. Some of them are,
but they're not often perhaps brave enough.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So I often exactly like true. I think amongst the things that true scholarship requires is cojones. I think literally, because it's very common, this issue about intellectual leadership. Requires a lot of courage in all realms, actually, and fear to break the mold, fear to depart from your school of thought, fear to, I don't know, use a different kind of language to say things. This is quite common. I mean, I've seen it for different topics, for sure. Many people behind closed doors will agree with me on certain things, and but say, I'll never say this in public. I'm like, what is this? Like, this is ridiculous, So yeah, but I think if that's what's needed. So let's get that going, Ibrahim.
Yeah, we need to at some point.
No, you need to. This is your realm, okay? I'm just making you make the commitment in public.
We'll do it, inshallah. I mean, this is where the Zakat fund comes in, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah,
famous
okay.
Zakat fund.
We'll maybe come to Zakat. I think we're going to do that closer to the season.
Fair enough.
But one thing I do want to give you a chance to do is to describe the roadmap to taking Cur8 Capital with its current 150 million AUM, how are you 10xing this thing? What does that look like? What kind of things are you investing in today? And how do you see that portfolio of investments emerging over time?
How we think about where we are investing in is very much with that end in mind, because I feel like, sometimes we, as an investment community or, as Muslims, we sometimes, or as business people, we think, all right, we're going to make this massive and then we're going to go and, put our topi on and become a lot more religious and, do that stuff. But I actually think, from ground up, we should be building that way and giving charity if we want to do charity, and giving charity as well, and growing that along the way as well. So the funds that we've got 2 income funds. We've got a GBP one and a USD one. The GBP one is all focused around Islamic home finance and home ownership, and essentially getting into the weeds of trying to like what's the dream for the Muslim community in the UK is being able to get Islamic mortgage, getting a house in an Islamic way that is on par from a pricing perspective with everyone else, and at the same time it kind of adheres to their principles. I think that's a dream, and we think that this fund is probably one of the key solutions to doing that, because the way that this fund, what it does is it gives the funding lines to various different Islamic home finance providers, and the more of these providers that you have, you immediately see it, the lower the prices get. And the more that you're actually in the weeds of these structures and in these companies, you can actually be really innovative with the mortgage product itself. And frankly, that bit we haven't really tinkered with too much, but we can be really, we can do some really interesting stuff that make it a lot more equitable, make it a lot more interesting for, for consumers, for the mainstream as well, not just for Muslims. So all of that is coming. So the fund is about 30 odd million now. We've backed Stride Up so far. We're, God willing, going to back Offer. We've already been backing them on other things, but on the home finance side, when they launched that, we'd want to back them, and then other companies as they come along, we'd want to back them as well, and grow that. So that's that. And then the US dollar fund is a lot more around this whole business finance stuff, right? And to some extent, consumer finance as well. But business finance and consumer finance are just kind of these black holes. Once you get onto the pitch in this realm, you kind of get a bit more of the lie of the land, and you can kind of, my thoughts around the home finance stuff is a lot more developed than it is on the SME finance side.
Yeah.
Because we're just not, that fund is about 10 million and it's a little bit early days still. But through that, the thinking is that you've got a bunch of Muslim entrepreneurs in particular, but also Muslim entrepreneurs that don't necessarily attract finance because their company, either because they're Muslims and they want to take conventional, or because there's actually a dearth of SME finance full stop across the economy because of the points I made earlier on banking. And so it's trying to provide them with a bit more at-risk capital than your bank typically would, but with a higher return, so that investors win, and then the company has the money to grow as well. So that's kind of what's happening there. Then we've got some real estate stuff, because we need to have some real estate in there as well to keep everyone happy. We're in particular.
But is that is that just traditional funds or anything?
The Rasmala fund is focused around build to rent, and focused around like trying to innovate with structures of the building where it's a little bit more communal. So you've got you have a lot more people who are kind of living isolated lives, but it's kind of saying, okay, why don't we take out some of that space and create communal areas that everyone in that block can actually use. So it's kind of this idea of communal living, and then you also have our primary healthcare real estate. So we own just GP sites up and down the country where the NHS is the landlord. The NHS is the tenant, we're the landlord. So that's kind of, I guess, at some level, the marketing is that we are supporting the health infrastructure of this country by investing into that. And then the stuff that I get really excited about is venture and private equity, where you're literally just in early stage tech, you're literally just backing brilliant ideas and backing often Muslim entrepreneurs, just because of our network, but not always, with these ideas. And we want to try and create the next Google, Amazon, Netflix, whatever of the world, that is in the hands of those of faith, right?
Sure.
So they can.
And are you seeing a lot of high quality things coming through?
Yeah.
Okay. And on the client side, like what is the client base now?
About 3,000.
So that's still relatively small.
Yeah.
But that's contributing. Obviously, that's what's bringing your 150 million, what have you,
yeah.
right? So it sounds as though the limitation on growth is not the opportunities for investment, but just simply people coming on and wanting to do this.
It's a bit of both. It's
Okay.
a bit of both.
But how do you get that 3,000 to 30,000?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are an intermediary. We sit between investments and investors.
Yeah.
And
so you're sort of syndicating the finance more.
Well, I think all of the financial sector is basically intermediary.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's
fine.
what they do.
Okay. So it's not distinct.
Yeah. So what we need to do on the investment side is make great investments that work, but then also scale those investments over time, because 3 to 30 means potentially 150 to 1.5 billion, and that means that our investments need to grow up with this over time. So this is like a big thing that we focus on constantly. Like, so for example, the income fund is 30 odd million, will quite quickly grow, I think, to 40, 50 million. But that, when it goes to 500, now that's an interesting question, because are there actually Islamic home finance providers out there that can absorb that much capital? I'm not sure there are yet, right? So that means that we need now to think about other asset-backed financing, such as cars and home renovations and all these other things, and then finding partners that can do it in an Islamic way, etc. So it's so this is the kind of thing that keeps us busy over here. And then on the other side, investors, we're still relatively young as a company. I think this is just how do we go to market better. How do we do the customer service better, and how do we set up the systems for scale? So right now, like all of our traffic basically comes passively. Like we make our content, and we have word of mouth. That's about 30-40%, and that's kind of how they come to us, which is good. But then ultimately, when we want to start really accelerating, we want to have a sales team. We want to actually have a proper customer relations, all of this kind of other stuff. Maybe doing some paid marketing as well. That's this year, and next year is all about setting up those embryonic kind of teams for the first time, and then we kind of, I guess, accelerate after that.
What have you learned about yourself through this whole journey of the last 10 years or so?
I think you just have to play to your strengths. But you have to make sure that...
What are they in your case?
I think the strengths are, much more around like the communication, the, marketing, brand, being able to kind of structure deals and, investments with a lot of promise and potential that I think sometimes others might struggle with, being able to see that, like the macro picture, kind of corralling that all together, going from macro to micro quite quickly. All of those things I think are my strengths. Weaknesses I think are like rigorous attention to detail, and I think I am getting better at this latter one. I think the attention to detail is probably always going to be one that I need to work on, but the latter one is having difficult conversations with either the team or externally or wherever you need to, and just being able to say no to things, that stuff. Which I suspect comes more naturally to you.
I don't know.
But yeah, that stuff I think I need to. I've become better, but it's one of the weaknesses.
But what is it about having difficult conversations that has been difficult?
Because it's confrontational, right? So in investment, and like I guess my natural way of being is a lot more diplomatic, and sometimes you just have to say to someone that, look, this is rubbish, unacceptable, we can't have that. And that's not particularly diplomatic. So that's the challenge.
Finding the way to do it, yeah. You're applying the sandwich technique to...
Yeah, maybe.
Say something positive, then say it's rubbish, then say something positive.
Maybe that's what I should do, yeah.
Okay, and what is it from a sort of team standpoint? Like how have you found like the whole team building, hiring, getting the right talent? How's that experience been for you?
We're quite lucky in that there's a lot of people out there who are not very, quite disenfranchised with their current roles, and there's not very many Islamic options for them in the financial sector anyway. So yeah, we just have hordes of people reaching out to us, wanting to work with us. I guess that doesn't mean that it's easy for us to actually pick the right person. What I've learned through the hard way is that we need to be really rigorous with interview processes. We need to be really rigorous with reference checks and doing a good job on those. And once the person is in, it should be pretty obvious within like 3 weeks, I think, if they're a good fit or not. And if they are, then obviously you keep them. If they're not, then you have to let them go. And I think like if it's not I heard this somewhere, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. And I think that's quite a good. Like it's better to just not hire and wait than try and go for someone that's a bit meh.
Yeah. It's like all these things. We often project our hopes and dreams onto somebody.
Yeah.
But in terms of just to assess it coldly in terms of how is it right now.
Yeah.
Okay. I for some reason, people regularly message me to say, how do I get into Islamic finance? They clearly didn't hear me saying, yeah, they didn't hear my views on it in the first place. But just so I can refer them to this section of the video, when it comes out, what obviously you'll have heard this, obviously way more than me. People who are at university, maybe they've worked in conventional finance for whatever period of time, and then they're like, okay, now I want to get into this whole thing. How do you frame it for them? How do you advise them?
I'd say that it's good for them to do some, work experience if they can in Islamic fintechs in particular. Maybe an Islamic bank, but I suspect Islamic fintechs would be more interesting. And I think doing stints within the mainstream world is a good idea. I personally would try and avoid as much as I can the impermissible end of the spectrum. Like if they want to go into investment banking, I'd try and go, for the, advisory boutiques, even though they work you a lot harder, I think, like the Lazars and Perellas and, someone like that. Accountancy, law, and, all of that stuff is perfectly fine. And it gives you a really good grounding in what, you want to get into. And then after that, I think it's a question of either finding a role within this space or even creating your own business, and jumping in and rolling your sleeves up and doing stuff, because there's lots of blue ocean out there that no one has really addressed yet.
What are the key areas where you think?
I think insurance is a big area.
There's been attempts, though. I mean, it seems that, I don't know the details of it, but it just seems very tough.
Well, I think the attempts that were made were not very successful, for sure. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible.
Sure,
this is a big opportunity.
Of course, yeah.
And there's actually Muslims who own like decent sized insurance companies.
Oh, really?
And they want to do Islamic, insurance as well, because they're keen to do it. So I think it was just down to pure execution why the previous examples failed. And I think it's very much possible to do something in this space. I think there's a slew of kind of what traditionally would be kind of conventional finance or debt products that are useful, and Muslims don't necessarily have access to them. And without kind of going into the ethics of it all, but like things like home improvement loans and buy now pay later, car finance, all of the various shades of financing that you get out there. I think there's interesting opportunity to do something there as well, and bring our ethics to that industry as well, and show how we do it. And then I think that at some point there's probably going to be a major consolidation exercise where everyone just buys everyone else, I suspect, in this industry. But I think a bank, a truly kind of first principles bank that's actually good at the payment side of things, and
payment meaning
just bank accounts and being able to send money to someone and being able to log in and look simple things like that. Islamic banks are just terrible at.
Yeah.
So if you could have someone that does that, I think that's quite promising. But I suspect rather than starting with that, I suspect you kind of need to end with that.
Yeah.
Unless you have major sovereign backing, and also for some reason they don't cock it up like they usually do, and they actually let you kind of build as you want. So I think that's probably an area. And then I think there's a whole bunch of stuff on the investment side. So I think public equities, I'm not even sure where the chips are going to land there, but you've got the traditional ETF robo-advisory model is kind of, I think, heading, I don't know about the ETFs, but the robo-advisory model is on its way out, I think.
Because?
Just because the margins don't work. So, and then at the same time, you've got this new technology that has come along where, and we were actually, we came across it a few years ago, and we developed this thing called IFG Fund Replicator, where we screened for the halal versions within mainstream funds, and then you could pick those and do. And the logical next step there after that would have been, all right, you plug into a broker, and then we just run this for you, kind of at arm's length. We didn't go down that path because we felt that I don't think the market necessarily was big enough, and also it was a distraction for what was working. But I love the fact that people like Amal Invest and Zoya and Halal Stocks, and there's a few of these players now that have come along and are kind of, going down that playbook. And maybe that's the way that you kind of sidestep this whole BDS and, ethical screening kind of conundrum. So that there's that area. And then I think financing and private credit and private equity from an investment funds perspective, we're kind of in some places the only show in town, which is pretty embarrassing because we're tiny, and there's people a lot better than us, even in the Muslim community, who I think should be stepping up and doing some stuff. And if they do, we would back them, right? We would just become an investor with them, and then off they go.
Biggest frustration nowadays?
Biggest frustration. I don't know if I've got I don't think I've got any frustrations. My biggest worry is about because in a weird way you have I didn't really have imposter syndrome before, but I think people, because once you get past a certain point in the journey, people start ascribing more success to you than I think they should, and I think I'm at that point, and so. I think that worry for me, it's not really a personal thing, because I'm not like that introspective, frankly, but it's more for the business, which is that we just need to continue kind of growing at the right level to kind of match expectations.
Okay, it's interesting you said you're not that introspective.
Yeah. Why do you think I am?
No, I don't know. I know, that's interesting. I suppose it depends what it means. You're not second guessing yourself too much or thinking too much about, I don't know.
Yeah.
You're just getting on and doing stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not I'm not really that bothered about how I'm perceived.
Right. Okay. From that point of view.
Yeah.
Okay. That's different though. That's an aspect of introspection maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. I understand. Cool. Any all the sort of Zakar stuff, community funding, all of that stuff we'll pick up maybe another time.
We'll do it.
But any key sort of either takeaways, action points, unsaid things that you want to say before we close up?
I think for audiences, I think that hopefully what they can do is invest and back those companies and park their money in those places where they feel that the custodians are going to create a better future for the world, and they kind of have a clear vision about what's going on. I like to think we're one of them, right? But I think that's really important. And then I would say for the entrepreneurial people out there, we need more entrepreneurs, because an entrepreneur is just another way of saying, problem solver. And there's lots of problems that need solving. So we need to just, start, eating into those and creating, little
value.
Yeah. Creating value, planting flags in sectors and areas that we just don't really have coverage at the moment. Set up a think tank.
Yeah. Well, that's your action point.
Yeah, all right.
There you go. All right, cool. Now, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been good to have you on. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you for your friendship and companionship as well. You've always been very supportive of anything that I'm up to. So I do appreciate that a lot.
No, jazakallah.
I have a lot of respect for what you're trying to do. I do hear critics, sometimes, or some of my friends are sometimes critical of, IFG did this and IFG said that. But I from my own experience, I know how hard it is to build something that's fresh and that's new, where you're learning and where you're thinking do I even know what I'm doing, etc. And so I think that all of the as long as the attitude of leadership is humble enough to listen, to learn, but also not compromising in terms of the end goal, the vision, being clear about that as well. Then I think things will work out. So yeah, keep going, and I look forward to this think tank being established. And yeah, I'll stick in various. Not that my minuscule platform will help incrementally at this point in time, but I will. I'll stick in various links for people to kind of check out. Yeah, certainly those who have money who aren't necessarily investors and they want to see see whether this might be Cur8 might be an interesting place for them to sort of park their money or some of their money, then yeah, we'll stick that in there.
Let's do it.
All right. Until next time, Ibrahim. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Am I
alaikum
allowed to say
salam.
that?
You are. Peace be upon you, brother.
Peace be upon you.
As long as you say it intentionally.
I actually sit. I sit in the team as well on team calls because we've got all sorts on there.
Yeah. All right. Look, conversation's finished now. Okay,
Oh, is it?
that's it. We should draw a line. All right. Cut.